This is Military City, a podcast from expressnews.com. San Antonio Express News senior reporter Sig Christensen was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division during the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and has reported on military-related topics for decades. Here on the podcast, Sig and I discuss the military stories important to San Antonio, both from today and the past. Dick Cole, the last of the legendary Doolittle Raiders who boosted American morale with a daring air raid on Japan in the 5th month of World War II, died Tuesday morning in San Antonio at 103 years of age. Sig, great to have you back here on the podcast. This is our topic for today, and I know it's one that you're intimately familiar with. You got to know Dick Cole over the years, and for that reason, this would be your time to tell me some of his story. Obviously he was made famous for his role in this raid, but obviously there's a lot more to that story as well. And then throughout today's episode, as we usually do, we're going to have a few audio clips, not of Dick Cole himself, but of Air Force Chief of Staff General Dave Goldfein, who spent some time with Mr. Cole before he passed. So take it away, Sig. Tell me about Dick Cole.
Well, Dick Cole was one of 80 men who were involved in the raid. There were 5 men in each crew. And this was really an extraordinary idea they had. Use this bomber, which was a medium bomber, to launch off of aircraft carriers. Now, that had been done by 2 planes, I think, prior to their launch in combat, but this was the first combat launch of a bomber from an aircraft carrier. And, it's funny, but Jimmy Doolittle, Cole's pilot, Jimmy Doolittle was the guy who came out with the procedure for taking off from those aircraft carriers. They did the testing in Florida, and none of the crews had any idea why they were doing that. They trained pretty hard over there in the Panhandle, and then they went to San Francisco and boarded the aircraft carrier. Nobody knew until after the ship got underway what this mission was about, and they were all given a chance to back down. They were given a chance to not go and do it. They were all told you're volunteers and you can unvolunteer. Not one of them even considered that. They wanted to go up against Japan. And this was going to be the first American blow against the empire, literally a blow against the empire. And this was a one-way trip. Dick would have argued that it was not. He talked a lot about how if you were in Europe, you were flying every day into the heart of Germany and you didn't know if you were going to come out of that. And a lot of people did not. So that's a really good point. He didn't think they were doing anything really different from what the guys in Germany, flying over Germany, were doing. And that's who he was. Dick was a very humble man, and he had a great sense of humor. You would simply not realize, unless somebody told you, that Dick Cole had flown this mission, and that he had been Doolittle's co-pilot, and they were crew number 1, the first plane to take off from that aircraft carrier, a moment that is filmed and captured in photographs. And if you ever saw the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, you actually saw the footage. So there's a lot that goes into this. Ultimately, this mission changes the outcome of World War II. The Japanese are completely embarrassed about it. They had said that nobody would ever bomb Tokyo, and they had given their word to the emperor. Well, they got a real nasty surprise. In terms of the military effectiveness of the mission, there's not much to say about it, although the raiders did attack only military targets. But the real outcome is in what it does with the Japanese commanders and their planning for the war. They moved up the Battle of Midway, and they thought in their extreme confidence that they would win that battle, and they were defeated. And that alters the outcome of the war. It is the last time the Japanese really win anything after rolling through Asia in the first 6 months of World War II. After Midway, the war turns in America's favor, and it never stops turning in America's favor. That's what those guys did. But when you talk to Dick Cole, it was just a job. It was a mission. It wasn't anything that special. And even his daughter never knew a thing about it. Cindy Shaw, his daughter, told me the other day when we were talking hours after he had died that she had to find out about the mission from reading about it in elementary school. That's who Dick was.
Sig, let's come back to this. We'll hear more about Dick Cole and the life that he led. But right now, let's hear from General Dave Goldfein. He's the Air Force Chief of Staff. He saw Cole Sunday night. He then passed away Tuesday morning. So just recently here, as we record today's episode of the Military City podcast, you spoke with Goldfein about his time with Cole before he passed away.
He wasn't able to talk as so well, but we were able to communicate. And when I walked in and he woke up and he looked at me because, I spent time with him, and he just gave that Dick Cole smile, big smile, and reached up and I grabbed his hand and he gripped it, and it was just as firm. Just as firm a handshake as ever. And I told him that we were thinking about him. His Air Force was thinking about him. And he nodded his approval. And I told him, the long blue line is carrying the torch that he handed to us. And he nodded his approval and smiled and gave me that big grin and big grip. And I'll tell you, there'll never be anybody like him.
To go to a little background about the raid, as I mentioned, 80 men took part in it, 5 per airplane. There are 16 planes. There are 10,000 Navy personnel in that task force, which launched the aircraft. So it's quite an operation. And nobody knows a word about it till they're at sea. A Japanese trawler was spotted, and the mission was moved up, and that put the airplanes at the extreme edge of their range. It changed the timeline of the mission entirely. They would be coming over China at night. There was no guarantee that they were going to find the airfields they were supposed to land at. And in fact, a lot of people didn't land. Some of them didn't anyway. The Cole crew, led by Jimmy Doolittle, bailed out. And Dick Cole lands in a tree about 12 feet above the ground and hangs there by his parachute for the rest of the night. Other planes. Leland Factor was killed. He was a corporal. He was killed on bailout after the mission. 2 men from crew number 6 drowned as a result of a crash landing in the water off the Chinese coast. Those were Sergeant Donald Fitzmaurice and Staff Sergeant William Dieter. 8 men were captured. 3 were executed by firing squad. 1 died of beriberi and malnutrition while in prison. 4 survived 40 months in prison. And as you can expect, they were not in good shape when they came out. So this mission had terrible consequences for some of those members of the Doolittle Raiders. One of the interesting things that comes out of the mission, though, is that Jimmy Doolittle thought he'd get court-martialed because things went wrong. He got the Medal of Honor for that, and he was promoted to Brigadier General. Doolittle went on to the 8th Air Force, and Chuck Yeager worked for him there. Chuck Yeager talks a lot about how Doolittle changed the way that they went about their business of defending aircraft. So Doolittle told the fighter escorts and the P-51s to go up against the German fighters every day. So they went and hunted the German fighters, and they racked up an impressive list of downed aircraft and protected their bombers in the process. Doolittle was another servant leader. Not much gets said about him in some of these stories because so much of the attention focuses on Dick, who outlived all of the Raiders. Doolittle, though, was the guy who created, he invented uh, uh, the way that aircraft navigate. So they didn't have GPS back in the day, but he's the guy who figured out how to fly an airplane at night uh, and how to fly it in weather. That is used to this day in modern aviation. He considered that his most important contribution to aviation. But he was known as an aviation innovator at a time where there were a lot of pilots out there who did stunt flying. He was not just a great aviator, though. He was a tremendous leader. He led by example, and all of his men held him in such high regard that nobody would ever go against him in anything that he said or did. They followed him, what you might say, blindly. They believed in him completely. And in fact, when you hear Dick talk about the mission, I said, did you ever have any doubts about it? And he said, no, we had all the confidence in the world in Jimmy Doolittle, and we would have followed him anywhere.
So as we've already mentioned today, and you just briefly mentioned now, Sig, Dick Cole, he outlived every single one of these people on this mission, all 80 men. He just passed away on Tuesday at 103 years old in San Antonio. General Goldfein, as we've mentioned, was with him near his death. You spoke with Goldfein. Here's our second clip of that conversation where you asked the general what he thought of Mr. Cole, not just as a warrior, but as a man, a person, and as a civilian.
What I really loved about him was he really embodied being a servant leader. It was never about him. I had a chance to celebrate the 75th anniversary with him at the Air Force Museum. And I leaned over. At one point, we had a little time together, and I asked him, I said, hey, so what did it feel like to be in that airplane after you hit your target, low on gas, on a one-way mission, trying to find your way blindly to the Chinese coastland with no beacon? And he just looked at me and smiled. And he said, well, it'd have been nice to have had GPS, that sort of, character of the man.
So that is the character of Dick Cole. He had a wonderful sense of humor. One time, I asked him what his secret to longevity was, and he said that he kept moving like the sheriff was after him. And he actually lived that. One day I was at his house, and this is one of 4 houses that he built. So he was a man with a lot of hobbies and skills. And he walked 100 yards from the house to his mailbox. And when he did that, I think he was 99 or 100. So you know, my mom was 100 and no longer walked. She was in a wheelchair. She could walk, but she did not want to fall and risk breaking her leg, which is something that had happened before. Dick Cole kept moving like the sheriff was after him, and he believed in it. He handled the fan mail every day, and he was very generous. He would respond to all that mail by signing autographs, sending pictures, writing notes. He did that for me. Just a wonderful man. He never let this whole mission get to his head. And it would have been easy to do so, because as he got older and the number of raiders dwindled, he became more and more the object of media attention. A lot of reporters interviewed him, but he never let it go to his head. And I think I know why. He knew what happened to all of those raiders. 3 of them were given a trial in 1942. It wasn't a trial in terms of like the ones that we're used to. They didn't even know the charges against them. And then they were taken to a cemetery and shot. 5 other men remain in a military prison. They lived on a starvation diet. One of them died. He knew the sacrifices that these people made, and he always thought that what he did was not that big a deal. And that's always something that amazes me, but I will tell you that his sense of being humble, his sense of just being a part of something that many others paid a higher price for, that never left his mind or his heart. And I have always loved him for the fact that he kind of just kept everything in balance. He had an understanding of what mattered. So there are a couple other things about the Raiders. 4 of them became prisoners of war in Germany. So many of them kept on going, serving in some theater of war. Dick Cole went to the China, India, Burma theater and spent 14 months there after the Doolittle mission. And then he returned after he got married and was involved in a commando group that built airfields surreptitiously. Beyond that, 13 of the Raiders died during World War II, most in action against the enemy. So what you know about these men is that they were like all the rest of that generation. They didn't just do their bit once. They went on and served their country again. And that was the whole generation. It's an amazing group of people. And what you know about what happened this week is that the last of them is gone, and most of them are gone. So whenever you get a chance to meet one of these guys, it always is incumbent upon me to sit down and talk to them and listen to what they say. And I take a tape recorder when I do that.
And that brings us to our final clip here of General Goldfein, Sig, where you asked him that as Dick Cole, celebrated as a role model for his role in the Doolittle raid and being the last living member of that raid, you asked the general what made him more than a role model, what made him an icon. This is what he had to say. And before we hear this final clip, Sig, I'll give you final thoughts.
Well, I guess my final thoughts come down to a couple of things. Dick wasn't just a warrior, although he was a great one, and he earned tremendous respect. He was a husband and a father. He had moments of triumph and loss in his life. So he married a woman who actually was a stowaway on his plane in 1943 when he was testing it. He fell in love with her right on the spot. 2 weeks later, they married, and then he went back to China to go with the first air commandos for yet another tour of war. He comes home and he stays in the Air Force, and he takes his family all around the world. They have 5 children, and he lost 2 of them in the last 20 years. He lost his wife as well. But before they did that, he built 4 houses himself. He lived after retirement in the Rio Grande Valley, where he grew grapefruit and oranges and began experimenting with avocado growing as well, which was something new in the day. He had a lot of interests and had a full life. He had done much more than just serve in war, and was always quiet. But he never forgot the, I guess, the bond that he had with Jimmy Doolittle. And I guess I should tell you that when Jimmy Doolittle was in his barnstorming days, Dick Cole was a kid who rode his bicycle to watch Jimmy Doolittle fly. And that amazes me because he kept a scrapbook on him and other barnstormers. He followed Doolittle's career. And then there he is in the cockpit with Jimmy Doolittle, his idol. And they're about to be the first plane to launch off the USS Hornet. And I said, weren't you in there just saying, I can't believe I'm with Jimmy Doolittle? And he said, nope. We were going through the checklist. It was all business. Now, that just amazed me because it's like being the guy who gets called up to the stage to suddenly become the drummer for The Who because Keith Moon has passed out. And how can you just sit there and not just be pinching yourself that you're in the middle of something really big and something that's right out of a childhood dream. But Dick Cole was not that kind of guy. He was just a regular dude, and he was a great pilot. He was a great father. He was a wonderful husband and a real fundamentally decent man and great friend. And I will miss him. I mourned his loss even at 103. I am going to miss his grin, which General Goldfein talked about. And I'm going to miss his wonderful lightness of personality. He was just a wonderful man.
Well, you go back to the original story. These young men were told after the USS Hornet put to sea. They weren't told until they were on that ship, what this mission was all about. And every one of them was given a chance to back out. And without hesitation, they all jumped in. And when they had to launch early, when they'd been spotted, without hesitation, they launched into the weather, knowing they'd be low on gas. They did the nation's business, and that's what we all stand to do, and that's what airmen do today. That's what we've done for all time. And I would just say that the other thing I think we really have to highlight is the importance of his family, what they've meant to us as well, because they've stood by his side throughout. Our families exhibit a very great, very special kind of courage, when they endure the long hours and the hardships and the separations that are so much part of military service. And so I want to end with just offering our condolences to his family, because you're airmen for life. And so the whole family is ours for life. And we will never forget